When I move back east for the summer, I tend to screw up time zone changes a little bit for the first couple of weeks because I'm 4 hours off from where I normally am.
Okay, yeah, I was gonna ask you, where are you?
Well, normally I'm in California, Silicon Valley, but the summers I spend in Eastern Canada, where my family's originally from.
Nice.
So I am northeast of Maine right now in a province called New Brunswick.
Hopefully you're away from the fires.
Yeah, no, we're not impacted by the fires. It's about 300 miles from here. The fires in California, those can be a problem. The last summer we were like 5 miles from the evacuation zone. So that was suboptimal. I guess that was 2 summers ago now. I should talk to your son about wheelchair archery. I'm one of the nationally ranked female wheelchair archers in the U.S.
Oh, that's awesome.
And it is the best sport ever for people in wheelchairs because we can do it just as well, if not better, than people who are standing.
That's
and
awesome.
So I have an arrangement with a Berkeley nonprofit that specializes in getting disabled people doing outdoor sports, and then also the range, and they let me use the range once a month to teach. We've taught groups of blind people. We've taught groups of people who are quadriplegics. We teach them how to shoot with their mouths. One of the best disabled archers in the world, actually, he's one of the best archers in the world, period, has no arms. He shoots with his feet. So archery is very, 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 very adaptable. It's a lot of fun. It's very addictive.
So nice to hear that. So you're a traveler as well?
I do. I travel both for archery and for my job. So I'm on planes by myself in a wheelchair a lot. I fly Southwest all the time, and they're so Southwest, the company. I mean, the people are bad, right? People shouldn't be doing it, but Southwest is also bad at dealing with it. I had a Southwest airline attendant last summer, so just about 12 months ago, threatened to have me arrested, was going to call the air marshals because they hadn't brought up my wheelchair yet, and I wouldn't get off the plane. And they were already loading. You know, Southwest is known for doing these little short flights and with really tight turnarounds. Right. So they were already, they'd already given up on finding my chair, and they were already loading the next flight's luggage. And I'm like, I'm not getting off until you give me my chair. And so the flight attendant and I are yelling at each other. And then the pilot for the next flight came on, and he actually went down and screamed at the baggage handlers and made them find my wheelchair. And also Southwest has the highest rate of wheelchair breakage. It's like 3 times higher than the other airlines. So you've got to be pretty careful with them. Sometimes they're unavoidable. But if it's just a matter of like $50 difference or an hour's difference or something like that, I don't fly them anymore. And I used to be a loyal Southwest customer, but not anymore. Yeah, no, it's always complicated. And everybody's all excited about the new wheelchair where you can get your chair on the plane, and then they strap your chair into the seat that just got demoed by Delta. And I'm like, okay, people, you have to realize, A, it's only Delta that's doing this. B, it's going to be 10 years before the FAA approves it, minimum. C, you got to get all the other airlines to buy on and wait for new airplanes because they're going to have to be retrofitted for this. And then D, it's not going to cover you for international flights. It's only going to cover you for flights that both take off and land in the US. So I agree it's a good step, but people are treating like it's the holy grail of wheelchair travel. And I'm like, not so fast. We got a lot of hoops to jump through before this turns into reality. I like your Prince wall hanging.
Thank you. Yeah, it's from a local artist.
That's nice. When I was a lawyer, I did a case for Prince once.
And what was that like?
It was about 28 years ago, I want to say. It's somewhere between 25 and 30 years ago. And it was back when the internet was just getting started, and it was kind of the wild, wild west, and people were uploading bootleg copies of his concerts up onto websites. And it wasn't he didn't like the bootleg concerts up there, mostly because he was upset about the sound quality. He didn't think it was a good representation of his skills. But also the thing that really upset him was these sites were using ads for porn to fund the costs of the downloads. Yeah, so he authorized us to go after these people and force them to take down the sites so that he wasn't associated with this advertisement, and that bad audio quality of his music wasn't getting distributed. He didn't really care about the money. He cared about the other two things.
That's amazing. I mean, he was such an amazing musician.
Yeah, I was really sorry when he passed. That was not a good situation.
Yeah, same here. Did you get to talk to him personally?
Once. He didn't talk much. I mean, we were just on a conference call together with his, because I was an internet lawyer, so that's what I specialized in, and there were very few internet lawyers at that point in time. And then he had his local attorney in Minneapolis with him, obviously. So I've been working in the space called digital accessibility for about the last 15 years. I have a degree in computer science, I'm a lawyer, and I have an MBA, plus I have the lived experience of somebody who's used a wheelchair, continually for the last 8 years and off and on for, 50 years before that. And I also have a daughter who's deaf. And so I actually got into digital accessibility because of my deaf daughter, because lack of captions really impacted her. And I think sometimes it's easier to advocate for our children than it is to advocate for ourselves, because no parent ever wants to accept their child being discriminated against. So that's the space I've been working in for about the last 15 years. And basically I work on things so that websites and software and electronic documentation can be used by people who use assistive technology. So they can be used by screen reader users or people with dyslexia who are using various different tools. I myself use magnification to read things because I have glaucoma. So there's a lot of different types of assistive technology that need to be accounted for. And if you're following the WCAG WebCon accessibility guidelines, then your digital stuff is probably going to be pretty good. But if you don't know what they are, chances are it's going to be pretty bad, because we always say digital accessibility, you don't get there unintentionally. It's not an accident. It has to be deliberate. Right. It has to be planned. It has to be integrated into everything that you do. And so that's what I do. I help companies plan for it, integrate it into everything that they do. We do training for design teams and developer teams and QA teams to teach them how to do it as efficiently and easily as possible. I really love my job because I can look at things and say, well, you know what, that used to not be accessible and now it is. So, I made the lives of other people with disabilities easier. It just makes me happy.
What are some of the examples that you can share about works like that? So
there's several. The one that's probably the easiest to understand is using color. So 6% of people in technology are colorblind. It's 4.25% of the general population, but it's actually 6% of IT because IT is 80% male. So if you're doing a product that's specifically intended for a technology audience, if you're not careful about how you use color and how you use red and green in particular, you're going to make it very difficult for a large chunk of your users to be able to use your product. So that's always an easy one for people to understand. Almost everybody knows somebody who's colorblind. And if you don't, you probably know somebody who's colorblind, but they haven't told you that they're colorblind because it's hard. If you know more than 15 people, one of them is colorblind.
That's a high number.
Yeah, it is. So that is one of the 50 guidelines in WCAG. There are other guidelines around things like, well, don't embed text in pictures. Because when you magnify the picture, the text becomes unreadable. Sure. There's guidelines around the verb that we use is announcing. So if you have somebody who's completely blind or who is using a screen reader for other reasons, screen readers takes the visual and turns it into sound. But let's say you're on you're ordering groceries from a grocery store website, and you put something into your cart. You want a bag of Oreos, let's say. Well, a whole ton of things change on the screen, right? Your subtotal changes, maybe the delivery, the amount that you need to buy to make the delivery minimum changes. Maybe it tells you that there's a coupon that you can use. So you do one action, but multiple things happen. All of those things need to be conveyed to the person who can't see the screen, who's using the screen reader. So that's another super important guideline that a lot of people just really don't understand. If you don't understand how people who use screen readers, how they consume data, you're not going to understand how or what they require in order to have an equal experience. So I always tell people who are just getting started on their accessibility journey that the why is much more important than the how. If you understand the why, the how is easy. If all you're doing is memorizing the how, you're gonna miss something for sure. The one thing I always warn people about, this is one really good example. People are taught, oh, you have to describe everything. Every picture has to have alt text, and that's not actually the case. Informative pictures have to have alt text. If there's something in the picture that's not in the accompanying text, then it requires alt text. If the text covers everything in the picture, then you're helping somebody who's blind by marking that picture as decorative, because then they're going to be able to get through it faster, because their screen reader will just skip over the image and pretend it doesn't exist. That's another accessibility myth, that accessibility is expensive and we have to hire all these specialists and we have to make our website boring and bland and vanilla. Totally not true. So there's really only 3 parts to the color guidelines. One is don't mix red and green together ever, because people who are colorblind won't be able to distinguish between the red and the green. It looks the same to them for the most common form of color blindness. The second one is don't use pastels on a light background, because if you have pastels on a light background, there's not enough contrast for people with vision loss to be able to read, especially if that's text. And then the third one is always use something with color. So don't just have a red circle and a green circle. Have a green with a check mark and a red with a stop sign, or a circle and a slash. Have an icon or some other type of what we call a visual indicator to show which one is the red and which one is the green and what does it mean. If you follow those 3 rules, you're actually probably going to be in pretty good shape with respect to color. And it doesn't take long to internalize those 3 rules. And you don't need to hire a psychologist or a market research person in order to figure that out.
That's really good to know. So I appreciate those as well. And I'm sure the audience will like that as well.
Yeah, some people, especially before, not so much now, but when they were hiding what we call the fine print, they'd have little light gray print on the bottom of the footer so that hopefully you didn't see it. That kind of stuff is illegal because there's not enough contrast and people won't be able to read it. And especially if your audience is elderly, let's say over 65. Over 65, we humans just in general start to lose the ability to see light blues and light yellows. And the older we get, the more we need that contrast in order to be able to read.
That makes so much sense, and I see it everywhere, when you get those promotional mail with the little tiny fine print at the bottom, and I'm like, that's
with the expiration date, it's like 6-point font. Yeah, that's not a good situation for anybody, and especially not good for people with vision loss.
So traveling between Canada and the United States and having the legal background, what's the actual legal aspect in terms of requirements for businesses to offer accessibility?
So that's complicated, shocker, because of the state of the United States Supreme Court right now. I live in California, and in California, we have state laws governing accessibility that are probably the strictest laws in the country. So if you are based in California or you want to do business with people in California, the California laws are really what you need to follow. So the problem is the Americans with Disabilities Act requires equality, right? Equal access, but it didn't specify the standard that needed to be met. And so that's been causing a lot of litigation churn over the last probably 10 years ago was when the litigation really started to take off. And there are people who go around doing nothing but suing companies over having inaccessible websites, inaccessible hotel descriptions is a popular one right now, inaccessible retail. And it's just that we're relying heavily right now on case law, where the courts are coming out and saying this is accessible or this isn't accessible enough, rather than having an actual law that we can point to. And relying on the courts to tell us is very slow and very expensive. So I'm hoping that eventually the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, will actually have a standard written into it for digital accessibility, but right now it doesn't. Generally speaking, if you're following the WCAG 2.1, version 2.1, the middle level of the standard, so not the strictest standard, and not the lowest, but the middle tier, which is called level AA, you're probably going to be able to avoid most litigation, or if you do get litigated against, you'll have a good defense. That is kind of the de facto standard, but it's not actually written into a law anywhere.
What would be the mechanisms to have those incorporated? Do we need to talk to our representatives? What needs to happen?
So the Department of Justice is back on trying to establish standards for the entire country. There's a law pending right now in the California legislature trying to establish a standard for everybody who does business in California. It's just a slow process. And the problem is because it takes more than 4 years sometimes to get this stuff done. If the next set of politicians didn't agree with what the first set did, they just cancel it, which is what happened when there were some laws pending under the Obama administration that they did not get finished before Trump took over, and Trump just canceled them all when he took effect. Wow. And then when Biden took over, they canceled the cancellation, right? But you can see, because the process is so slow and because we keep on flip-flopping back and forth between parties that are pro-accessibility and anti-accessibility, that's why we haven't made a whole lot of progress from the legal side of things in the US for the last decade. And that's why the litigation has taken over as the primary form of guidance. Now, that's not a Canadian thing at all, okay? So right. in Canada, the Accessible Canada Act passed, I believe it was 4 years ago, and then it got stuck in implementation because of the pandemic. Canadian government just had more important things to focus on, and so that delayed some of the implementation. But it's getting back on track now, and Canadians tend not to be as litigious as Americans are, so it's less likely that litigation will be a main driver in Canada, but it's a huge driver in the US. We've had between 4,000 and 4,500 lawsuits that have actually been filed. You know, wow. For every lawsuit that's been filed, there's probably 10 more demand letters that have been sent out that haven't resulted in litigation. So, you know, probably between 40 and 50,000 complaints a year in the US regarding digital accessibility, just digital accessibility. And that doesn't include the physical accessibility stuff. Like, you know, there are cities that have, well, let me give you an example. New York City and their subway system. 75% of the New York City subway system does not have elevators.
Wow.
So they just entered into a consent decree, which means it's kind of a form of a settlement between the disabled parties that were suing and the transit authority in New York, saying that by 2055, that 90%, I think it is, of the subway systems will have elevators. So that means I'm going to be dead before because I'll be
Wow.
90 in 2055. I don't think I'm going to be looking for a subway in New York. That's a problem. It takes forever to get infrastructure changed because, you have to jackhammer concrete and you have to remodel things. It's just so much better to build things to be accessible from the outset. And then you don't have to spend all this time and money and energy retrofitting things. Right. And the same is true for software. It's just the only difference is software can be fixed by rewriting code. You don't have to jackhammer concrete.
Right. It just takes a little bit of time. That's it.
Yeah.
In Bolivia, my experience going last year for the first time with a wheelchair was that there's been an improvement. I see more sidewalks, more businesses that have wheelchair access, but it's a small percentage, obviously. So
it is.
What's your perspective?
So I have been to Ecuador in a wheelchair. It was pretty doable. One of the nice things is the advent of things like, various different delivery services. You don't have to worry about whether there's a curb cut at the taco place you want to go to because you can get the tacos to come to you. But obviously that requires some pretty substantial financial resources. That local people might not have the same level of availability. I do think that things are getting better. There's a lot of countries have now accessibility laws. There's a lawyer by the name of Lainey Feingold. Her website is lflegal.com, I believe. And she just updated her global review of various different accessibility laws. And there is something like 30 countries, I think, at least, if not more, that actually have accessibility laws. The Middle East is particularly good. The EU is obviously outstanding. Australia is good. The UK is good. Canada is good. Certain countries in Asia are good. Singapore is one of the best in the world in terms of access, physical access anyways. So there are more and more countries getting on board with both physical and digital accessibility. Now, you might ask yourself, well, why is it that they're doing that now? Well, there's a real focus globally now on sustainability. And if you look at the United Nations Sustainability Development Goals, there's 17 of them about how we're going to become a sustainable society. 8 of them, so almost half, either directly relate to disabilities or indirectly relate to disabilities. And so people and governments are realizing that unless we treat the, 15 to 18% of our population who are disabled, if we provide them equal access, those people will be able to contribute to being a more sustainable society. And I think that that's what a lot of the motivation is now. Not necessarily to be nice to people with disabilities. I wish that was it. It probably isn't. But it's more about, we can't have 18% of the population sitting on the sidelines. We can't have 18% of the population not able to work, even though they could work if we made these few changes so that they could get up the ramp into a schoolroom or get into an office building or, use a screen reader to read a web page. So it's more about creating a sustainable society than it is specifically about helping people with disabilities. At the end of the day, I actually don't care what it is. It doesn't matter what the motivation is. It matters that change is happening.
Yeah. I agree 100%.
Right. The thing that makes me bananas is when I'm traveling by myself and people assume that I can't take care of myself. I've literally had people grab my wheelchair and start pushing when I'm in the airport. And I'm like, what the hell are you doing? Did I ask for help? Do I look like I'm in trouble? No, get your hands off my damn wheelchair. That's actually the biggest problem I faced, just the really snarky comments from people, and they don't even realize that they're being ableist. I'll go through TSA and they'll say, oh, are you traveling by yourself today? And I'll say yes. And more than one occasion, I've had somebody reply, oh, good for you. Like somehow I'm special because I can travel in a wheelchair. You know what? Right. I travel the same way everybody else does. I get to the airport, I get on the plane, I get off the plane. I may get on the plane and get off the plane differently than everybody else, But other than that, there's nothing special about somebody in a wheelchair traveling by themselves. So I would say I've never had anybody assume that I was mentally deficient, or talk to my husband instead of talking to me if we're traveling together. But I have had many, many, many occasions where I was assumed that I just wasn't capable. And that is truly annoying. Those are what we refer to in the DEI community as teachable moments. Sometimes I have the energy for a teachable moment. Sometimes I don't. It just depends if I'm at the beginning of my trip or the end. But yeah, those situations can be truly exasperating.
What about the good experiences?
Good experiences. I have this famous saying, which is, it's hard for me to remember specific instances where I've been included, but I can tell you all the times that I've been excluded. Sometimes the good experiences don't stick with you, because everybody should have good experiences. Good experiences shouldn't be special. If I get from one end of the country to another and my wheelchair is not damaged and I get to the hotel and nothing bad has happened, I haven't had a taxi pass me by because I'm in a wheelchair, because that happens all the time too. Those are definitely the better experiences where I can say, hey, look, I did this trip that lots of other people do, and I actually didn't have any problems. But unfortunately, the trips where I have zero problems are few and far between.
Well, as an avid traveler, I can relate to that.
Yeah, understood. I think many people who have experiences with wheelchairs and traveling tell that same story or some variation of it.
So what's going on with your life right now?
So I am trying to qualify for I'm not sure, probably the Canadian Olympic team at this point for archery.
Nice.
I'm a dual citizen, so I kind of have a choice.
Cool.
So archery is my sport. I have work in archery and very little else, because archery, when you're competing at the level I am, is kind of a part-time job. Really, I probably spend an average of about 20 hours a week on it.
Wow.
I'm working on some pretty cool stuff with respect to generative AI and accessibility right now. So that's something I can't go into too much detail on a podcast, but I'm hoping in the next few months there will be some things that maybe my company will be releasing into the open source that people can use to improve their accessibility by using. It won't be using ChatGPT, but it'll be using something like ChatGPT. But I'm working on a localized LLM related to accessibility. That's probably the most that I can say at this point. But it's really exciting, some of the things that we're realizing that we might be able to accomplish that will take a lot of the more mundane work off of our plates and allow us to focus more on the things that really require a human neural network, and a human brain to analyze and interact with the assistive technology.
That is very exciting. Please let us know when you're able to in the future, if you can.
Definitely.
Well, that's amazing. I'm very honored to meet you and to learn about a little bit about your path and what you're doing. Is there anything else you wanted to share?
So I do have a book out that I released 2 years ago that's free, and it's called Giving a Damn About Accessibility. It was published through the UX Collective. So it's at accessibility.uxdesign.cc, I think. You might have to double check that URL because it's been a while since I've gone and looked at it. And then I'm going to be having some training coming out. So it's going to be a 10-week course on how to make events and documents and software and websites and training just more accessible, written for the person that knows nothing about accessibility, but maybe working for a company, running events, running conferences, developing documentation, developing web pages, and teaching them the why, and mostly the why and a little bit of the how, about how to make their digital properties more accessible.
And where can people contact you or find you?
So the website that we're going to be using for that is called accessibilityblueprint.com. So they'll be able to contact me at info@accessibilityblueprint.com. Just run those words together. Of course, I mean, I plan on working in this field for the foreseeable future. So, and because I've got a computer science degree, it really allows me to jump into the new technologies very quickly. There's not a lot of people in accessibility with the background that I have, so it really does give me a unique perspective on how can we utilize these new innovations to improve the accessibility experience.
I agree. You're an asset and you're shining so much, and I appreciate that.
Well, thanks for inviting me to come talk to you.
Take care, Sheri.
Bye-bye.
Bye.